Hello and welcome to Scilence, a podcast that gives women in science, technology, engineering and maths, or STEM, an opportunity to be honest and open about what it's really like working in these typically male-dominated subjects. Each week, one woman shares her stories and experiences. She could be a public figure, the girl next door, or someone from a far-off land. The point is she'll be deliberately kept anonymous and disguised to ensure that we're not distracted by the details of her achievements, her labels, or what she looks like. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, also a woman in STEM. I studied mechanical engineering and ended up as a television broadcaster. I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation over the years, and through my television work, I've met some incredible women from a diverse range of STEM fields. And you know what? I've been more amazed about what I've learned from these women when the cameras have been turned off and they're just being themselves. These women have amazingly impressive CVs, but most importantly, they're human, just like the rest of us, and it's that off-air honesty that I'd love to share with you through Scilence. It's my hope that you really relate to what's shared with you today, and you're inspired and supported and comforted, as I always am when I chat with my amazing guests. If so, please do subscribe to Scilence, and maybe even leave some comments and reviews. I'd love to have your feedback. This week, my guest is in the field of solar science. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. How did you feel when you first heard that this was anonymous?
I'm not used to doing things anonymously. I don't mind if people know who I am, but that's fine. That's the way you're doing it, so that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I have decided to make it anonymous is because often I think young girls trying to get into STEM feel quite intimidated by the achievements of others, maybe even particularly the achievements of women. Have you ever experienced that?
I'm not sure I have. I think that as you get a little older, there is sort of generation gap, perhaps, where younger women may be a little bit more afraid of you anyway because you're that much older. And people, the press or whatever, media aren't as interested in you because you're that much older as well. So, but I don't think I'm intimidated. I know quite a lot of young researchers, young people, and I get on very well with them. So I hope that I'm not intimidating.
So what is the ratio in solar science of men to women?
Actually, it's quite good. I think it's almost 30%, which is quite high for astronomy as a whole. And I put that down partly to the fact that there have been a lot of female role models, and we've encouraged each other and supported each other, and supported younger females as well. So I think we're quite lucky, really, because I think in the we have quite a few females in the field.
So in terms of your own story then, how did you get into solar science? Was this something that you dreamed of doing from an early age?
No, I think I was always interested in science and maths, and I was particularly good at them at school. And my father encouraged me in that regard. So I thought it was perfectly normal to do science. I didn't think there was anything odd about it. And I was always interested in astronomy. I look up at the night sky and think, wow, that's amazing. So it really fascinated me. So I wanted to find out more about it. And then when I got to university, I did some dissertation, some work in solar science, and I got interested in it. So then I did a PhD in solar science and stayed with it, and I still think it's absolutely fascinating.
What's fascinating about your field?
Well, the sun's amazing. I mean, the sun is it's amazing because scientifically it's fascinating. It's very close. We can see a huge amount of detail, which is often very difficult to explain, but it's very beautiful. And also, I think because the sun is something you can associate with from a very early age. So it's almost a spiritual thing. The sun shines, you feel happy, so you kind of feel a close association with the sun, when the sun goes through phases of activity. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's active. But you like to keep an eye on it, and with the solar spacecraft we've got now, you can actually see what the sun's doing on a daily basis, even on a every 12-second basis if you really want to be obsessed about it. But it's just fascinating to try and understand what we see on the sun.
And what is the sun doing? Because I've never thought about it in terms of it doing something radically different other than burning very brightly.
Well, we're seeing the sun from space, but the sun is not constant at all. It's very dynamic. Even in its quiet phase, it's still quite dynamic. So there's a lot of small explosions going on. Sometimes there's some huge explosions going on. You see these dark features called sunspots on the sun, which indicate a lot of activity. At the moment, there's very few, but even so, the detail is interesting. So we try to understand why these explosions, these solar flares happen. Sometimes material shoots out into space, and sometimes it hits the Earth, and we get the beautiful aurora, northern lights. So it's fascinating. The sun obviously is hugely. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be here without it. We wouldn't have life without the sun. It's hugely important to us, but it's also important to understand not just the energy, the light, the warmth, but also how it interacts with us in other ways when it shoots out material and affects us. So,
forgive my ignorance, but it kind of feels like the research that you're doing is a bit like space research, in the sense that you're finding out some incredibly interesting and complex things, but the knowledge that you're gaining is you can almost filter it down into something that we can use here on Earth.
Yeah, I think that it is that the knowledge we're gaining is pure science, in the sense of knowledge for the sake of knowledge, how things work. But obviously, the more we can understand how the sun works and what's going on in the sun, the more we can understand other stars or other astrophysical bodies. But also, it does have relevance to things on Earth as well, to understand that, pushing technology or understanding other things. I, in myself, have worked with space observations, so I've done a lot of work with NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA, and so in big collaborative teams working on a lot of different solar space observation satellites.
Right. So is our understanding of the sun able to help us generate maybe renewable energy? I mean, what is the direct impact on us?
The field of the energy in the sun is produced by nuclear fusion reaction. We can't exactly reproduce that here on Earth, but people are attempting to produce energy in the same way as it's produced in the sun and the stars, with some large experiments. We had one in the UK here, it was international collaboration, but there's one over in France as well called ITER. It's a huge international experiment. So that there is a relationship between what we understand about the sun and that environment and the development of these large fusion reactors, which will be safe and pure and clean. They're not like the nuclear reactors we have at the moment. But also, of course, there's a huge push at the moment for renewable energies, as you said. So solar cells, panels of solar cells, and all sorts of developments in the field of developing materials that are flexible with polymers that could go, for example, on the wings of an aeroplane, so that you could reduce the amount of fuel that aeroplane needed. And in many other ways. So there's a huge push at the moment. Obviously, we need to find other ways of getting energy, renewable energy, rather than using up all the resources that we have in coal and oil and things like that. And also from the point of view of the environment, burning coal and oil produces chemicals that we don't really want to go into the atmosphere, and carbon in particular, causing carbon burning causes atmospheric gases, which then turn out to give us climate change. So we need to find other ways of producing energy. Definitely,
it's really amazing the kind of spin-off technologies that occur as a result of developing a greater understanding of what's happening on the sun, in the sun. And, we could probably do an entire episode just on those technologies.
I think you could. Indeed, particularly most recently with the launch of Parker Solar Probe in August. That really requires great development of new materials that can shield the satellite and the instruments from the heat of the sun. So there's something called carbon developments that, new materials are being developed. So I think that's really pushing the frontiers of technology.
So it's incredible. I think in terms of your fascination with the sun, I mean, I completely resonate with you when you talk about the intrigue of the sun, and kind of, as a child, I would look up at the sun and just think it was so incredible and be fascinated by it. And I think I'm a sun worshipper, but not in that conventional sense of like trying to tan or anything. I'm just fascinated by the sun. I love daylight hours. But I didn't go into solar science. Like, what was it that made you specifically feel like you wanted to study it more? Was there like a turning point that you remember?
Before I answer that question, can I just check something you just said, because you should never look at the sun. So I just don't want our listeners to think you should look at the sun, because it's extremely dangerous, because it is so bright that it can actually make you go blind. So I always warn people, don't look at the sun. And also you've mentioned tanning, and that's an interesting concept as well, because the sun doesn't just give out light in the visible. It also gives out light in other wavelengths, in the ultraviolet UV light, for example, which can be problematic for our skins, which is why we need to, we now know, I didn't know when I was young, so everybody was tanning themselves, but we now know that's harmful to us, and that we should protect it from it, with sun cream and sunglasses, etc. So you asked me if there was a turning point when I realized that the sun was fascinating. Well, I mean, I as I say, I got drawn into it by doing a project, but then for my PhD, I got the opportunity to work with somebody who wanted me to work on eclipse data. And total eclipse of the sun is perhaps the most awesome natural experience you can ever have. It's incredibly moving. I didn't at that stage, hadn't seen an eclipse. It took me very many years before I actually saw a total eclipse of the sun. But I did get drawn into working on this data. And I think the choice was really not just related to the work and the sun, but it was related to the supervisor who I was interviewed by, because I realised that he was somebody that I could work with and that would be a very good supervisor. And I judge a good supervisor as somebody who, when you come out of their office, you feel better than when you went in, because you always go in with trepidation and lots of stupid questions. But this person never made me feel stupid. He always listened to what I had to say. And yes, I say, when I came out from seeing him and when I talked to him, he always made me feel better afterwards than I did before, and answered my questions, but answered them in just a straightforward manner. And I think that's really important when you're young, to have somebody supportive. And I recognised when I was looking for a supervisor that I could work with this person, that he was a kind person, and that he would very, very, very eminent scientist, but that he had the sort of approach that would nurture and encourage me. And he did, all my life practically. He was always there for me. If I had any difficulties, I would, turn to him and have a bit of a moan, and he'd say, "Never mind, let's deal with that. Let's move on." So I think that that's really important, to have those sorts of people in your life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's really fascinating that you bring that up because in all the episodes that I've recorded with female guests, it's been interesting to see common themes come up, which is that we as women do need encouragement. Maybe not just as women. I mean, just as people. Yeah, we need encouragement, we need support, we need nurturing, we need kindness, all the things that you just mentioned you got from that particular supervisor. How important um, do you feel that is for girls and women thinking of entering into a career in STEM?
Well, I think you said it's not just for in relation to girls. I think that it's important when you're entering into a career or when you're embarking on a PhD, which is a 3 or 4 year project, that you that you make sure that whoever it is you're going to work with is somebody that you feel you can get on with, because that the succession, you will go through difficult times. So you need people that are going to be on your side and supporting you and working with you. So my experience is that's as important to males as it is to females, because you need nurturing and you need that support. It's a difficult time, and you will have times when you get very low and things don't look that great, and that's the time when you need somebody on your side and somebody saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. It's going to work out."
Did you ever feel that in your earlier educational years? Because um, often girls are very capable and competent in subjects like maths and physics, but then they hit an age around about 10 or 11 where they suddenly get very conscious, self-conscious about those subjects, and what the statistics are showing is that they tend to drop out or lose interest in those subjects.
Yes, I think that guess I was, as I say, relatively fortunate in that I never really thought there was anything that odd. I mean, I knew I was one of the few girls that did maths or science, but I never really thought, I never really thought it was particularly strange that I should do that. I mean, I was a little bit of an odd child anyway, I suppose, for various reasons, but it didn't worry me. I wasn't particularly good at history or languages, so, for me it was obvious to do the maths or the science. And I I was a year younger than everybody else in my class, and that's kind of set me aside to begin with, because I was younger. I got into the school a year earlier, and I think that because I was already, as I say, slightly set aside, doing maths and science didn't make much difference. But um, I think that the perhaps the other girls thought I was odd, and although I'm very friendly with them now, I think I did feel a little bit different in some ways. But later on, when I was 15 or 16, I was at a girls' school previously, and I went to a mixed school, a mixed grammar school in those days. And I was just so happy there because the boys just seemed to accept me for who I was, and let me join the crowd. They weren't worried that I was a year younger than them. That difference didn't make any difference to them. So I was extremely happy in a mixed environment, which is strange because actually they say that girls do better if they're in a single sex environment, but I wasn't happy. I was always happy in the company of boys. So, and I think that was true at university as well. I was always happy in the company of boys, and I was always happy in the company of men. It didn't worry me. They had similar, interests in maths and science to the ones I had, and that was fine. And we had a bit of a laugh and a bit of a joke.
Yeah. Do you think you felt more comfortable around men because you were a tomboy, or?
I think I probably was a little bit of a tomboy when I was younger. I was a little bit small as well as being young, and I did like to climb trees and go on the farm. Yeah, so those. I wasn't that keen on girly things. I never wore makeup ever, so I guess maybe I was a little bit of a tomboy in that regard.
For me, as a female amongst in a very male-dominated environment, I almost felt more comfortable denying my femininity in order to survive in, engineering. It was a lot easier to push my femininity to one side. Did you experience that?
No, I'm afraid I didn't have that experience. No, I think, as I say, I was a bit of a tomboy, but that didn't mean to say that when I grew up, I didn't. When I was older, no, I absolutely felt very feminine. I never attempted to not be feminine in the company of men, and they, as I say, we got on as friends, but I think as an adult, I would regard myself as quite feminine. I never related to other people in any other way.
But you weren't the type to be wearing makeup and...
Well, I didn't wear makeup, but I don't think that's necessarily a feminine characteristic, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I like to think that I didn't actually need to wear makeup. I know that's terrible to say, but uh, I had nothing to cover up. Sorry. But also I had an allergy, so if I did happen to put makeup on, my eyes swole up, so it
Right.
was a bit of a deterrent to wearing it.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel the need to wear makeup, but I did wear, you know, pretty clothes. I made my own clothes. I wore short skirts. I was in the time of mini skirts. I wore short skirts. I wore or wore hippie type stuff. So, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't dressing in a feminine way. The fact that I didn't wear makeup was just, as I say, indicative of the fact that my face would swell up like a balloon if I did. And anyway, I didn't see the need to do it. And
Yeah.
I still find wearing makeup is counterproductive, because I think it doesn't do people any good when they get older. It doesn't let your skin breathe. And, I just don't like it. But, it's my preference.
Yeah, I think it really is fascinating to me because as we grow up, we are exposed to so many different types of experiences, and we are perceived in certain ways, and it really does shape the adults we become. So, coming from my own perspective, I think I just wanted to really fit in. And so it sounds like you never really struggled with maths and physics, so there was no problem there.
I felt happy and fitting in the school with the boys. When I went to the school with the boys, I didn't feel that comfortable with just the girls. But when I went to a mixed school, I felt very happy. I felt I fitted in. I felt I was happy. When I went to university, although I was in a minority, there was only a few girls on the physics course. I was very happy. I had a lot of friends. I had boyfriends. I was very happy. And then when I did my graduate work, I always felt wherever I was at home and comfortable and happy in that environment. So I think it's sad if people don't feel they fit in. But I don't think that doing science is perhaps the reason why they don't fit in. I felt comfortable and happy in that environment, and I loved doing the science. And but I didn't feel that was. I didn't feel there was somewhere else that I should be belonging. I belonged there. And it's the same in the solar physics community. I'm been very, very happy. I have many friends, males and females, and they feel like my family. I feel very happy, and they've been supportive to me over the years, and they're really good friends. So I think that it's sad if someone's in a situation where they don't feel they belong, or they feel that other people feel they're different and they don't belong. And it's unfortunate if people are not accepting of everybody, whoever they are, whatever they are, whether they're male, female, or whether they're gay, or what nationality they are. It's a pity if they're not accepted for who they are, because I think the most important thing is just to be who you are, not to try and adapt to some other model that other people think you should be.
Yeah. And that is something you seem to have had for a very early age, because you did describe yourself as an odd child, but that doesn't seem to have held you back.
I was a little bit of an odd child, and I was quite bright, and I was quite young. So as I say, a little bit younger, and but that hasn't held me back. I think that sometimes children, if they have, I don't know, problems, or if they, they can turn to learning, turn to books as something quite secure, So I think that I found a security in the science and in the physics and in the maths, and was good at it. And people tend to do the things that they're good at, because then that makes them feel good. So I think that yes, I was only. I mean, later on in life, it's been a little bit different, because I've been in a more male-dominated society where, let's say, quite a few people have perhaps been to public schools, or I haven't felt quite as accepted in that society as I had previously. So I agree that there are places where you may not feel comfortable. But it can be just as difficult for senior women, can sometimes be just as unsupportive as men, and I found that very early on. I always knew that I wanted to have children, something that I always knew. I had younger sisters, and I always knew I wanted to have children. And yet, I was told when I was younger I had to choose. I had to choose between having a family and having a career. That was what I was told. And of course, it was a little bit late, because I was already pregnant, but, so I thought to myself, I'm going to prove you wrong. Sorry. And that was a woman that told me that. It was a senior woman in a position. She had obviously made that choice herself. And that's, that she didn't tell me that specifically, but I think she gave an after dinner speech of which this was the theme. To be a good academic, you've actually got to choose between having a family and having the children. And I think that there are a lot of compromises to be had in life, and I think that there is no doubt that, having had a family, I have made compromises in my career, and I think that, but nonetheless, I have been very successful in what I've done and what I've chosen to do. So, and with a lot of support from those around me, I think it can be done. But for someone, I mean, who tells a man they can't have children? It's that really, and that really upset me. I think that really.
Was it I'll show you kind of situation?
Yeah, exactly. I'll prove you wrong, mate. You might have made that choice, and that's fine. And I never, when I talk to younger women, or I talk to girls, they often say, well, have you got children? How did you cope? And I think everybody has to find their own path. I don't think there is a standard path, and I think that's the difficulty. I think people have a standard path that they feel that academics should follow, and when they judge people, they judge them against the standard path. Yeah. But I don't think that is always the case. So I think it's kind of almost a random walk. And I think that people have different ways of doing things, different ways of coping. Some people, some of my younger students, female students, left academia because they wanted to have family, or they wanted to choose a different career. So, and that's equally valid. Everybody, in my view, everybody is equally valid. Whatever choice you decide to make, that is a good choice. It's your choice, and people have to find their own way. But nobody should be told you can't do that, you can't have children, you can't do this, because that just, in my mind, is wrong. You're saying that in order to be successful, you have to be like me, and that's not the way it is. There is no one model.
I'm beaming from ear to ear right now, because I think I may have stumbled upon a guest who really has a strong sense of self, knowing exactly what she wants, and she just went for it. That's extremely rare, to meet a woman with that kind of attitude, because I think women are always so self-conscious and questioning themselves, and is this okay? And do you still like me if I do this and make this choice? But it doesn't sound like you ever had that attitude.
I don't think when I was younger I ever said, oh, that's where I'm going to go regardless. But I suppose, I think my father wanted me to be a teacher. He didn't want me to go and do a PhD, and but I think I took a journey, and I I I do remember thinking people never judged me. I was quite quiet when I was young, so they never realised quite how bright I was. That was, for example, when the A-level results came out, they were shocked and said, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. And when the degree results came out, they were shocked and they said, oh, maybe you could do a PhD. It's like, because I guess in those days, perhaps I didn't have the confidence and therefore I didn't come across as particularly bright. I don't know what it was. Anyway, I remember I had a boyfriend at the time, and I said, well, I'm thinking about doing a PhD. And he kind of he said to me, well, you do that. And, I don't want you to do that. You can't do that. You mustn't do that. And I thought, well, sorry, that's it, mate. Because if you're not prepared to accept who I am and what I want to do, it's not going to work, is it? So I don't think, in a relationship, you can tell somebody else you shouldn't be doing that, because then then you might have more qualifications than I have, or this or that or the other. It doesn't work like that. I was going to say, I think you have to choose your friends and your partners very well as well, because, and like I said, I chose my supervisor carefully. I knew that this is the guy I could work with. I think it's the same with your partners, or you think, well, this person is going to let me grow. This person is not going to try and stifle me, not trying to make me into something I'm not. This person is going to let me grow into the person I want to be, and we'll try and find a way. And if I want to have children and they want to have children, then we'll find a way to do it. But I don't think it's like I went for something and I knew exactly what I was going to do and where I was going to end up. I don't think life's like that, because I think you take opportunities, and I think it was extremely difficult at times, extremely difficult. And there were times when I was very, very low, and there were times when I had no funding and the future looked bleak, and and at those times, then you look around and you see other people who would support you. And I went to my head of department, and he supported me. He sorted it out for me. He we put together a package, and he wanted me to do something which was, for me, technically quite difficult. It was quite a lot of responsibility and a huge task, and I wasn't sure. And I said, "Oh, I don't know." And he said, "You can do this. You can do this. I know you can do this." He had belief in me. And then I did it, and 5 years later he turned to me and he said, I told you could do it, didn't I? And I think that belief other people have in you is also important. So you need to look around you and look for those supportive people, those people who are going to support you for who you are and what you are, and not try and make you into something different. That's the way I feel. And I think I've been very lucky at difficult times in my life that I've had strong support from the people around me. Also, not just in my department, but also males as well, mainly males actually, some females, but mainly males. But also in my community, my solar research community. When I had difficult times, then people would listen, people would give me advice, people would say, no, you can't leave, no, we're not going to let you leave, you're going to carry on, So I think that support has been crucial to me. So I don't think I have gone, dead for this path and it's gone straight. It hasn't gone straight. But I've had an idea of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and fortunately I have managed to do it.
Yeah, so I guess the lesson really is being able to discern who's in your corner and who's not.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't have a strong idea of what it is you want to do, you need to be able to discern who's a good influence and who's a bad influence in your life.
And seek help, and don't be afraid to seek help from people and support. People are more than happy to support you. But you need to seek them out. I did go on quite a few what you call development courses. There was something called Springboard, which is a women's development course. I think they have something called Navigator, which is for men as well. But that was quite crucial to me, actually, at a point in my life, because what you do there is you work through where your strengths and weaknesses are, where you see yourself in 10 years' time, what your support networks are. You work through quite a lot of those concepts and ideas about development and support. And although quite a few people regard these courses as waste of time or rubbish, actually, I found it very useful. I found it very useful to reflect on where I was, who I was, where I would like to go. Wouldn't necessarily get there, but where I would like to go if I got the opportunity, and what my strengths and weaknesses were, and what my network supports were.
Yeah, and that's actually quite a counterintuitive environment to be in for women in STEM in particular, because typically women in STEM tend to be very self-sufficient and almost in an isolated state of mind, because we don't fit the norm. So we're used to kind of forging through on our own.
Yes, I mean, that's not necessarily my experience again. Quite a few of my colleagues have I'm not saying we're needy all the time, but have at certain times needed support. I think that, we're the same as everybody else, and I don't think anybody's life, male or female, always goes smoothly. So that need to have a support network, I mean, to go out for lunch with somebody, have a chat, just to have a cup of coffee and have a bit of a download. Your life doesn't always go smoothly, and particularly if you've got young children as well, It can be quite stressful at times. And I think that opportunity to have people who you can just feel relaxed with, and as I say, just say, let's go for a coffee, or you fancy lunch today, and have a little chat about things, or meet up at conferences. I often meet up with my female friends and my male friends at conferences, but we go out for the pub for a drink and have a good old laugh and a good chat. And I mean, I don't get this concept of people. I suppose I've never got that concept of people being on their own, and that sounds a very lonely thing. I suppose in my work I've always worked in teams, so a team is very important to me. People laugh because in my group, the tea break and the coffee break and the lunch break are the most important thing. But they might laugh, but actually our whole department was designed by the head of department to be that way. He decided that the social areas were the most important areas in the department, and that's where people met, that's where people talked, that's where they interacted. Often they did science or mathematics or whatever there as well, but those interaction places were key to the department thriving. And I think that's a great insight into human nature. And I think that the concept of people sitting on their own is being lonely in that way is not one I can associate with very easily.
Right. Gosh, I mean, you're really switching on so many light bulbs for me. And I think one of the major ones is your acceptance that life isn't linear. It's so profound.
What do you mean by linear?
Well, in the sense that, you've had a kind of sense of where you want to go, but you've also been in acceptance that it won't necessarily be a straight road to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, a massive light bulb moment for me, because it's one thing having a plan, which is great, because I think, you've got to have some idea of the direction you're heading in. But it's also really insightful to accept that you won't get there in a straightforward manner.
It's quite often that things happen in our lives. We're not expecting them. You fail in some way at something you never failed before, or somebody dies, or a relationship breaks up. Things happen in our lives, and it's traumatic, and it seems like a disaster. And what we were kind of taught was to turn that around and actually use it as an opportunity to rethink the direction in which you're going. So you're right. I think that at certain times you thought, okay, this has happened. It might have been a disaster, or it might have felt like a disaster. But actually, what they're saying is later on you will see that as an opportunity, because that apparent disaster led to something else, led to a slightly different direction. It led to something else, because people's lives don't always go smoothly, and sometimes failing at something is traumatic for people who are very bright, because they've always succeeded all their lives. Failing at a relationship can be traumatic, if it breaks down. But actually, you have to look at it, turn it around, because actually that makes you stronger. That makes you a stronger person in the long run. And it also makes you much more empathetic to other people that have been through a difficult situation, however severe that situation is. I think you can then be empathetic towards them. So life does not go smoothly for most people. There are very few people that I know that it has just gone smoothly for. So I think it's a question of how you deal with those challenges, how you pick yourself up, how you look around for support, how you deal with that.
And what has been your personal experience with failure or relationship?
Well, I guess, as I say, there was a point in my life when I didn't have any funding. That's a bit of a failure, even though, I was told I was too old to have any more funding. That felt like a bit of a failure. I hadn't trodden the standard path, and I think that was the point where I really needed support. There have been other times, more personal times, where I've been on my own, and I haven't liked, if a relationship hasn't broken up, but somebody's been away for a long time, or something's happened, and I haven't coped very well with that. And again, the support of other people around me has been quite crucial to get through those difficult periods. Like trauma in anybody's life, I've had a close family member who's died, and that's a trauma. I don't think that's a failure, it's a trauma. It's something that happens, but it's something you have to learn to cope with, and again, learn to cope with support. You can't cope with these things on your own, I don't think. Perhaps people can, but in general, you can't. And there have been times in my life where I've even had to get professional help if I've been depressed, or if things haven't worked out. I've needed to say this, I need help here, so I need to go and get it.
I think for some women in STEM, we tend to think very logically and rationally, and it's, in my case, sometimes I've been wishing that failures or disappointments or traumas don't happen. And as I get older, I'm realizing that they will happen, and I have to accept that. And it's more like sort of praying for the strength and the endurance to be able to get through the inevitable.
That's right. And also allowing you, I think if they do happen, people around you need to know. There have been times when I've again been to my heads of department, different ones, and said, at this moment in time, I'm going through a bit of a crisis, and I need a little bit more leniency in what I'm being assigned to do. And they've said, that's fine. People will understand, because people have been through different things, and they will say, this is a temporary thing, but, we need to support this person and help this person. I've been, I don't know whether I've just been very fortunate, but I have had very senior people who have been very understanding, and maybe that is very fortunate.
Or maybe it was the assertiveness of being able to ask for a bit of support when you needed it.
I guess it's more than assertiveness. It's slightly being brave, because nobody wants to feel vulnerable, and nobody wants to show that vulnerability. But actually, I suppose it's funny. I wrote an article once about the problems of having a family and combining it with career and all the rest of it, and it was in quite a well-known journal. And somebody said to me, well, that's the end of your career now, it's like finished, it's over. And I said, really? Because nobody likes to show that vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to perhaps not be afraid of showing vulnerability, in the right circumstances, because actually we do need support and help. That's difficult, I think. So it is being slightly not assertive. It's more being brave and saying, okay, at the moment I need help. Who can help me?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I've been feeling a bit uncomfortable kind of delving into the certain topics we've talked about on this podcast, because I am very aware that are part of a highly prestigious university, and, you're very accomplished as a solar scientist. And yet, and whilst I kind of want to talk more about those things because it's a safer subject, it's amazing to be able to draw on your wisdom on the more personal side and to delve into more vulnerable subjects.
Yeah, I think I guess I went to a meeting, a diversity meeting down in London for one of the associations, one of the scientific associations, and there was it was very brave because younger PhD students and people were talking about their vulnerability in public, perhaps for the first time, and how they had dealt with mental health issues or other things, disabilities, or their sexual orientation. It was very, very brave of them to do that, I think, because people tend to keep these things covered over, and people tend to try and cope with them all. And this can cause more problems because this can make you feel isolated or, vulnerable. And I think it's that sense of actually realizing that we are all human, and that we do our work, we do our science, that's fantastic, but actually we're all human. So there are certain vulnerabilities as well, and we have to deal with those.
It's so beautiful. So on the subject of having it all, do you feel like you've accomplished everything you would hope for?
I think that I've had a really good and enjoyable career life. I've loved what I'm working on. I'm passionate about the sun and solar science. I've been very, very lucky. I've had good friends and I've got a wonderful family. But it's not been without its difficulties. And, there are scratches and marks and, wounds. And I think that I think that it's I wouldn't have done anything any different at any time, and I think that the idea of regret or the idea of changing things is doesn't make any sense. You take a path you take, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, and that's the way it is. You look to now and the future. There's no good. I have been lucky that, as I say, I've been very happy in what I've done. So yes, in some ways I have had a career, but I'm not perhaps quite as eminent, although you may feel I'm very eminent. I'm perhaps not quite as eminent as some of my peers. And had I had, for example, more mobility, I think one of the biggest challenges facing a couple is finding positions, whatever career they're in, finding those positions in the same location to start off with. My husband and I always decided that we would live in the same place. We wouldn't live hundreds of miles apart. And when you have a family, that's difficult to do anyway. So that was a decision we made. We were going to be together. And of course, that's had knock-on effects that I haven't necessarily had the mobility to take up opportunities when they've arisen elsewhere. But I don't regret that. As I say, those were choices we made. Those were compromises we decided to make. But I have to say, there is no doubt that in certain circumstances there are compromises, and I can't deny that. I can't just selfishly do whatever I want to whenever I want to. That's not the choice I've made. I shouldn't call it selfish because that's a choice people make. That's their choice. I shouldn't use critical words of them because I think that that's their choice. That's not the choice that I made.
So it seems as though to have it all, or to appear to have it all, which you appear to have, compromises do have to be made.
Yes, I appear to have it all, and I'm sure I've got a great deal, and I'm a very lucky person because I have been able to pursue a career that I love and have a family and have enjoyed that. I have to say that I have worked part-time a lot of my career. And again, that is a bit of a first for the places I've worked in. It wasn't necessarily standard. And when, for example, I was put forward for promotion, they didn't quite know what to do about it, because I'd worked part-time. But that, again, was a compromise that I decided to make. I wanted to spend time with my children when they were younger, and I decided that in order to do that, I wanted to work part-time. But I think those things are much easier now, perhaps in some circumstances, but not in all circumstances. But my feeling was always that if the culture wasn't right, I needed to do something about changing it. Because what I wanted to prove was that even though I only worked part-time, I was still doing something very worthwhile in that part-time, and I was achieving a great deal in that part-time. So I think it's then a question of trying to change the culture, a culture which says you have to work not just full-time, but 150% of the time. And if you're not working all weekend and every evening, you're not obviously not a worthwhile academic. So I think that culture, that work ethic, that culture, you have to change, and you can change it for the good of everybody, because everybody has other activities that they might want to do. Not males and females, they've got other things and other responsibilities. So I think that what my feeling was that if I didn't like the way it was, I needed to do something about changing it, and that's what I tried to do.
So what do you think that woman that you met at the conference would say about your choices now?
I think I don't know. I doubt she's still around. But if she were still around, I'm not sure she would understand my situation. In days gone by, academics in universities would have been celibate. They would have dedicated themselves to their research, and that would have been their life. And that is one life choice. That's not my life choice.
Yeah.
And maybe, in her circumstances, maybe that's what she did. Maybe she dedicated her life to her academic pursuits and could see no other way of doing it, no other way of compromising it. And some people are like that. So I'm not sure she would have been able to empathise or even understand the route that I took. But I think what I'm saying is that we should accept different routes for everybody, that everybody has different choices, different routes, different paths they may want to tread. We shouldn't have a standard route that is right. This is what you have to do. That was what I objected to. I didn't object to her saying, I've decided myself, to dedicate myself to this aspect of my work, and therefore I've achieved, the top in the field or whatever. That's fine, but she can't tell me what to do. To be honest, I don't think many people can tell me what to do.
And that seems to be the most amazing quality, is just, the confidence and the self-belief to just say, okay, you may have chosen a certain path, but I'm choosing something different, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I would say that to all young people, you choose the path that is best for you, the path that is best for your skills, for your talents, and makes you not say happy, not everybody's happy all the time, but satisfied. The path that you feel is right for you. Take that path if you can. It's not necessarily always possible to do that. I have been fortunate. I was fortunate to be able to take that path. It's not always possible, but do things in a positive way, whatever you do.
And is that the advice you give your own children?
Yes, they didn't pursue science. I wanted them to pursue whatever they wanted to pursue in their own lives, and they have they have, I must say, trodden their own paths. Not surprisingly.
And how do you feel about that as their mother?
I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of whatever they do, whatever they achieve, and they have achieved in different ways. They have had to face some very difficult issues and have dealt with them and moved forward and achieved them. And that's what I was saying to you earlier about the fact that things that don't work out, that happen to you, terrible things might happen to you, but if you get through those things, you are a stronger person and you can empathize with other people. And that's what we need in this world. We need people who can be tolerant and who can empathize with each other. We don't need people to tell us, you have to be this, you have to do that, this is the only way, this is the right way. That's not what we need at the moment. So I'm very, very proud of my children. Indeed, I am. Yeah, and they've had advantages in my career, in the sense that they've travelled quite a lot with me when I've been to overseas, when I've been to conferences. They've travelled with me and had a good time. So they've been to see quite a few places. So they've had advantages as well. And as well as having to put up with parents who may be busy quite a lot of the time. I think that's one of the things as academics or in that world, you tend to be quite busy, so you tend to be a little bit preoccupied some of the time. And but as I say, I've made the effort to try and engage with the children as best I can, and of course I love them dearly.
Well, it sounds as though in your children have such a supportive and loving mother who really wants what's best for them. And that's come about as a result of really wanting what's best for you. I think what we give is what we receive in terms of our relationships with others. And it's just been utterly inspiring talking with you. I feel as though you have a kind of wisdom that is so unconventional, in the sense that, there is so much freedom in the way you treat others and the way you treat yourself, and acceptance and kind of kindness. And so thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to learn from you.
Yeah, you talked about me and my children, and I'd like to say that my husband has been extremely supportive, and I think that, like I mentioned previously, that a supportive partner is essential. It's important. And he's changed the nappies, he's looked after the children at a time and cooked the tea, and done things that women would traditionally do, perhaps at a time many years ago when that wasn't the thing that men did. And he perhaps got a little bit of flack for not being very masculine, because he was prepared to do those things. And I think it's well worth remembering, that the men in our lives are important in the supporting the women who are in STEM.
Yeah, absolutely. What an amazing note to end on. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on this show.
Thank you.
What an incredible guest. I feel as though so many of the conventional ways of being have been turned on their head with my guests' kind of outlook and perspectives on life. Talk about brave. I mean, today I just have really heard bravery in a woman in STEM who is not afraid to forge her own path and defy convention. I'm utterly inspired. Thank you so much for listening to Scilence this week. Don't forget to subscribe and leave reviews and comments, and catch you next week on Scilence.